Hi, good morning or good afternoon to where you're joining us from, and thank you for attending our webinar today. My name is Dan Johnson. I'm the Director of Marketing and Customer Experience here at myHRcounsel. And then before we get started, I just wanted to remind you all that this webinar is being recorded. So if you have to jump off or you need to do something else, we will have this recorded for you. All attendees will receive a follow-up email later this week that's going to include the recording of our webinar, the slide deck, and then our HRCI credit if you are certified and need any recertification credits. If you have any questions or specific questions, we encourage you to reach out through our Ask an Attorney portal. That way we can give you specific legal guidance if you're a client of ours. And then if you have any other questions about your account or more information about our services, please reach out to us at info@myhrcounsel.com. And now I'll pass it off to Britt Waterman, who is a senior attorney here at myHRcounsel. Thank you, Britt.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third Tuesday webinar. Today we'll be talking about managing a hybrid and remote workforce, a topic that kind of circling back to something that back in March of 2020, everybody kind of had to do on the fly. Everybody got sent home, and there were it was kind of a patchwork stopgap kind of method going on, and kind of putting the cart before the horse when it came to organizing and getting policies together and making rules and procedures for your hybrid and remote workforce. And now that employees are being called back to the office in maybe a hybrid setting, or employers are making decisions about whether to keep employees remote, whether to downsize the office, whether to restructure the office. Managing a hybrid and remote workforce is a topic that is coming back into view now and is something that employers need to be thinking about, how to formalize, how to make decisions, how to look towards the future, the new normal of having a hybrid and remote workforce. So we're going to talk about today kind of an overview of remote and hybrid work, some of the policy requirements for having a remote and hybrid workforce, what you should have laid out in your policy or your agreement with your remote and hybrid employees, and then some of the legal considerations that are associated with remote and hybrid work, things to think of when you've got employees maybe who have moved to another state, another area of your state, another perhaps part of the country. During the pandemic, many people moved away from an urban or suburban area during the pandemic to a more outstate area, or even outside of the state, out to the country, and are maybe working somewhere other than where you are headquartered, and maybe either telecommuting from another state. Maybe now they're coming back into the office for a couple days a week, and you've now got an employee who's working in a different state in which they're residing. All of these things bring up legal considerations that we'll get into today. So remote versus hybrid work, the difference, of course, being that remote employees perform all work off the premises, and hybrid employees work some of their time off-site and some of the times on-site. Telecommuting remote positions have existed for a long time. So things like writing or technical writing, editing, document review, which is common in the legal field, things like software design or graphic design. One form of work that people don't normally think of that's been remote for a long time is telemarketing or appointment setting. Employers have had the technology to set up a phone system for employees remotely, and that's something that's been performed remotely for a long time. Employers have known for quite a while that they could get work done without paying for office space and overhead, and that they could recruit from anywhere in the US or even anywhere in the world. So when the pandemic forced the shutdown of a lot of businesses in March 2020, businesses were forced to come up with solutions to allow employees who had always been on site to telecommute. So telecommuting was really adapting these on-site positions to be done off-site. So employees would be still be logging into the system during business hours. They would still be in communication with their coworkers throughout the day, just as they would if they were in person in the office. They would still be attending meetings, doing presentations, sales calls, doing demos. Employees would be doing this using video teleconferencing, Zoom, GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar like we're doing now, Skype. Rather than having an in-person meeting, they switched to instant messaging, Microsoft Teams, Slack, instead of the walking from office to office or from cubicle to cubicle to share information. Generally, work hours stayed the same, although many employees surveyed since in the previous year or after the first year since March 2020 have said that as a remote worker, their work hours have actually become longer. People are putting in more hours and working later into the day than they were in the office. But reporting structures, job duties, all stayed the same when workers began telecommuting. The main challenge was just transitioning from face-to-face to face-to-screen. So some businesses that did not completely shut down adapted high-risk employees' positions into positions that could be done remotely as a reasonable accommodation. And this is for employees who were at high risk of contracting COVID or having complications from COVID when their medical condition prevented them from being in a public setting back in the early days of the pandemic. And this raised concerns for employers about where the line could be drawn or should be drawn as far as adapting positions into positions that could be done remotely or allowing remote work. Who would be allowed to work remotely? How would that be set up? Now in the later days of the pandemic and following the Great Resignation that we've all been talking about, employers may have to cast a wider net to hire, or a valuable employee may be moving out of the area or out of the state or even out of the country to follow a spouse or a partner who has quit their job or accepted another job. And being able to hire in another area outside of commuting distance to your physical location definitely opens up your candidate pool, or can also convince someone who is with you who is considering leaving to stay on. So it's a great way to recruit or retain non-local talent. Something I hear from clients every day is, it's so hard to hire, it's so hard to retain employees. Having remote or hybrid work arrangements are really a great tool in hiring and retention. So employers saw the benefits and the drawbacks to telecommuting and remote work during the pandemic, and some employers came up with hybrid work as a solution, as a middle ground between the two. So remote work by the numbers: 4.3 million people in the US currently work remotely at least half the time. The number of people who work remotely has, as you can see, increased greatly since 2005. Obviously a big jump between 2020 and 2022, but definitely on the rise since 2005. Speaking of hiring and retention, companies who allow remote work have 25% less turnover than companies who don't. So it is something that is a great retention tool. Employers concerns about productivity. Employees who work remotely at least once a month are 24% more likely to be happy and productive. 75% of people who work remotely do so because there are fewer distractions than in the workplace. So that's kind of contradictory to a lot of employers' fears that at home has laundry waiting to be done and dishes waiting to be washed and the TV sitting just over there in the corner by the workspace and things like that. So a lot of workers find that there are actually fewer distractions in the home. So remote work was already, like I said, was already on the rise before the pandemic. It's not going to be a now it's time to put the toothpaste back in the tube situation, nor should it be. And like I said, statistics definitely show that employees who can work remotely are just as productive as those working on sites, with most studies showing that remote employees are even more productive when working remotely than they were in the office. 21% of employees, so that's more than 1/5 of employees, when surveyed, said they would give up some of their PTO in exchange for a remote work arrangement, and 28% of all employees surveyed said they would take a 10 to 20% pay cut if it allowed them to work remotely. A 20% pay cut in exchange for being allowed to work off-site. Again, it is a tough time to be recruiting and hiring. Just hearing those statistics should let you know what kind of an edge this could give you over your competition when it comes to attracting the best candidates. The benefits of remote and hybrid work. We have talked about productivity, about fewer distractions, remote work. Obviously, the main benefit to remote work in the past 2 years has been stopping the spread of COVID. But there's also downsizing your office space has been a big draw for people who have gone to remote work and are deciding not to return employees to the office. Hybrid work is a great way to bring employees back while the pandemic is still ongoing, but people are now being vaccinated. Having fewer people on site on a given day allows you to have greater social distancing among your employees. So still taking some safety measures. COVID has not gone away entirely, and that physical distancing is another layer of protection. Both remote and hybrid work can allow you to reduce the square footage that you need in your office space and cut costs. As was shown on the previous slide, employees value any opportunity for remote work. Allowing employees to work remotely shows that you trust them, that you're responsive to their wants and needs. That leads to a better retention rate, that leads to a stronger investment in the company's well-being. Employees feel valued, work harder. That's something that has been studied and has been shown to be true again and again. As far as, like I said, with unproductive time, it may seem like there are so many more temptations to unproductive time in the home or other offsite remote setting. But everybody can think back to when we were all on site. If those of you who are not already back on site, everybody knows the water cooler, traffic jam, the long lunches, the appointment viewing on the TV in the break room, what's going to be on Ryan and Kelly this afternoon, or what's our favorite HG TV show, or you know, we're gonna all watch Jeopardy, things like that that cause people to congregate in the break room and engage in some time wasting behavior. This is something that is going to be eliminated when people are in their own remote workspaces. Employees are still going to send each other off-topic email, or somebody's going to put a meme in your Slack feed. But the time spent doing this is going to be far less than the idle time that occurs in the office. Also, because this does uplift morale, employees are also not going to have to spend as much time griping about their complaints about work when the morale is high. With hybrid work, you can still have those face-to-face check-ins. You can still observe the employee in real time without having to record calls and read strings of emails to monitor the quality of the work. You can see how the employee is breaking down their day, whether they are allotting what you feel is the appropriate amount of time to each task. That's something you can see when you've got a hybrid arrangement. And some things just can't be done from home without great expense, and you do need to have that hybrid arrangement for things that just physically can't be done from home. Training can be more efficient when you have a hybrid arrangement and you have two people physically in the same place interacting. You may spend more work hours on something, adapting it for telecommuting than you would in person, and that hybrid model may just be more cost effective for you. You may not need the workarounds that are going to make it more trouble than it's worth, or not worth the expense. So one consideration with remote work is reasonable accommodations. Like I had said early in the pandemic, there were a lot of requests for remote work, and I definitely saw a lot of questions from clients about remote work, allowing remote work for employees who had a disability, had a medical condition that put them at high risk for contracting COVID or for experiencing complications related to COVID. And there were a lot of questions as to, is this a requirement? Does everybody who is high risk for COVID have to be put in a position where they can work from home? How long do we have to keep them home? Are we allowed to tell them they can't work from home anymore if we send them to work from home and they're not getting any work done? It was a very sensitive topic and very difficult for a lot of my clients to kind of wrap their heads around when it came to working from home or telecommuting as a reasonable accommodation. Work from home is something that has been used as a reasonable accommodation for a long time for a lot of employees who have a medical condition that maybe causes intermittent flare-ups, where the employee may still be able to perform some of their work duties that they can do online, but they may not physically be able to come into the office. There are certain medical conditions where an employee may need to be in a home setting to have access to the restroom, or they may have a chronic pain situation where they may need to take some medication that doesn't allow them to drive. There are all kinds of various reasons where somebody may still be able to do their job, but just the work setting is not the place for them to do that when their medical condition or disability is flaring up. And so this is telecommuting. Remote work has been being used as a reasonable accommodation. long before the pandemic for employees who have this type of situation. And it's been working very well. And the ADA or the EEOC has studied this, has found that that this is something that's worked well as a reasonable accommodation. They have put out guidance on this if this is a reasonable accommodation that someone in your workplace has requested. One question that I get frequently is if you allow someone to work remotely as a reasonable accommodation, does that mean you always have to grant remote work as an option to any employee who requests it? And the answer is no. You do not. If you're accommodating an employee with a disability with remote work, that does not throw open the barn doors and mean that now remote work is the law of the land, and you have to allow everyone to do it. If you have a rule, like I said, employers may have to modify remote work policies in order to provide an accommodation. I've seen some clients have a rule such as employees must be employed for at least 1 year before they are allowed to work remotely. Something like that, you may need to make an exception to a rule like that for an employee with a disability who needs an accommodation. So those would be the kind of conditions that would need to be modified if a reasonable accommodation is needed. You're never required to provide an employee with their first choice of accommodation as long as you provide a reasonable accommodation. So if there are other accommodations that you can make that will allow the employee to keep their job and to keep working, just because their first choice is I want to work from home, does not mean that you automatically have to grant that choice as long as there is something reasonable that allows them to continue working. If you have an employee who is high risk for COVID complications and their position can be performed from home, definitely consider this remote work before saying, no, your accommodation is unpaid leave. Sorry, you can't come back to work until COVID is over. We're not going to allow you to work remotely. Your accommodation is will hold your job for you. I would definitely say consider remote work before taking that unpaid leave option. As always, with reasonable accommodations, you want to use the interactive process. You want to identify the essential functions of the job, which could be performed remotely, which must be performed on site. Can the on-site functions be handled by another employee? If you can redistribute some functions to on-site employees, but the bulk of the duties can be performed remotely, then working remotely would be a reasonable accommodation. Letting an employee do 2 out of 20 essential functions of the job because those 2 are the only ones they can do from home, that's obviously not reasonable. Allowing poor performance is not a reasonable accommodation. Employers have concerns that, well, if we allow them to work remotely and we're just not seeing the performance out of them that we need to see, do we have to let that keep going? No, allowing remote work as accommodation use, the employees still must meet the same performance or production standards. The accommodation, remember, is to enable them to level the playing field, to enable them to be able to perform the job the way that their non-disabled coworkers are able to perform the job. So you can still expect the same performance standards when you're reasonably accommodating an individual. And if you allow remote work for a non-disabled employee, you're really taking a risk if you deny it for a disabled employee, unless you can show a valid non-discriminatory reason why remote work will not allow the disabled employee to perform the essential functions of his or her job. This is where very detailed job descriptions are going to be very necessary for you. And if you do not have detailed job descriptions. If you are a client of ours, please open a ticket. We can help you with job description templates. If you are not a client of ours, or if you are an Ask HR Lite client, please see our website to learn more about our packages, to learn more about an upgrade so that you can receive documents and policies. Job description templates is something that we can provide you with an Ask HR subscription. And when it comes to going through the interactive process, those job descriptions, getting very detailed with that is going to be indispensable when it comes to complying with the ADA. So if you're allowing remote or hybrid work, you need to have a formal written policy that applies to all your employees rather than making one-on-one agreements with each employee. You can have different policies for salaried, exempt, or management employees, and hourly, non-exempt, non-management employees. If you have different policies for different groups of employees, you should have a valid, non-discriminatory, business-related criteria for the difference in policies by the different groups. Obviously, the policies should not vary based on protected class status or age or ability, disability, anything like that. That would be illegal. Employees should sign off on a policy or an agreement prior to beginning remote work. It should address all of these terms that I have listed here, and we'll get into some of these a little more specifically. Employees should be allowed to review your agreement or your policy and ask questions. The point is that there should be no surprises, and like I said, we kind of went into this head first at the beginning of the pandemic, and now we maybe need to backpedal a little bit and make a little more structure around remote work. But you need to have no surprises. There should be a very explicit policy or agreement so that if the employee is not following the terms of the agreement, you can discipline the employee or call the employee back to the office, revoke that remote working arrangement, and you can have support for that decision if the employee alleges that that was discriminatory treatment. Performance discussions between employees and their supervisors are also very critical prior to beginning remote or hybrid work. The performance standards should be the same with every employee in the same position, but laying out those standards or expectations and the metrics that are going to be used to measure performance is going to set you up for success. Measuring productivity from home or from a remote site may look different from measuring productivity in the office or on site. So you need to make sure that the supervisor and the employee are on the same page at the outset when you start the remote or hybrid work arrangement, or if you've already started it, at this time when you implement a formal policy and agreement, you should have those sit downs with employees and their supervisors and lay out performance standards and the metric for measuring those performance standards. And we can help you with a policy or a remote or hybrid work agreement. That is something that is included with an Ask HR subscription, is that written policy. Again, if you are an Ask HR Lite client, you would need to upgrade to Ask HR to receive that written policy or agreement. And if you are not one of our clients, again, you would have to subscribe to Ask HR to be able to receive that policy. But definitely we can work with you on a template or on a written agreement or policy that you can give to your employees or enter into with your employees that's going to cover you in all these areas. Doing business remotely. So your employee's work site, where they end up, is now your work site. It is your location. Employment laws apply where the work is being performed. So now you've got an office. If you've got an employee working from home in another state, you essentially have an office in another state, and you have to learn about the employment laws in that other state. One employee working in another state could be considered doing business in that state with regard to some state laws, which we'll get into here in just a moment. Having counsel is necessary for multi-state compliance when you've got remote workers in other states. Having someone like myHRcounsel, where we practice in all 50 states, we're familiar with the laws in all 50 states. Having attorneys like the attorneys at myHRcounsel is going to be really necessary for when you're doing business remotely and you've got multi-state employees. So foreign qualification requirements. So corporations have one domestic state. That is the state where your corporation is formed. That state's laws are the laws that govern what you do as a company, what you're able to do. If you are transacting intrastate business in a foreign state, a state other than your domestic state, you must qualify to do business in those states. In order for you to need to register to do business in another state, there needs to be a sufficient nexus between your business operations and the activities that are being performed in the other state. So there needs to be a significant or a strong enough connection between what you do as a business and what activities are being performed in the other state in order for you to need to register to do business in the other state. If there is a dispute between you and your remote employees, you can sue them in your domestic state or the state where they are performing work. However, as you can see here, failure to register could result in not just monetary penalties, but an inability to maintain a legal action in the state where your employees are working. In some cases, it may be more favorable to you to bring an action against your employees in the state where they are working instead of the state where you are headquartered. So you want to be registered to do business in the state where your employees are, if that is necessary, in case you do need to bring a legal action against your employees. You want to have that option. If you have employees who travel and work in more than one state, there are states that may consider you as transacting interstate business in that state. If you have an employee who spends 2 weeks working there, you've got an employee who is working remotely and they travel with their family for vacation and they work on vacation for 2 weeks in another state, there are states who will say you have to register to do business in that state, in that situation. So again, this is why you need employment law counsel. So generally, the state statutes, the laws in the state lay out what is or what is not considered conducting business, how long someone has to conduct those activities in the states. Some states don't lay it out in the statute, and then you need an attorney to look at the case law. Have the courts dismissed employers' actions against remote employees because they didn't register to do business? You need to analyze all the activities performed by the employee in the state where they're performing work and how they further your business. Are they taking orders? Are they making sales? Are they meeting with clients? How much revenue is coming from what the employee is doing? How essential are their services? In some states, it's going to be a no matter what, you have to register to do business. In other states, more analysis is going to be required. Again, this is why you need counsel to make sure that you are following the law in the state where your employee is performing work. As I said, an employee performing work in any given state is generally that state employee for the purpose of their employment laws. Many paid sick leave laws apply to any employee performing work in that jurisdiction, regardless of the number of employees performing work in that jurisdiction or the location of the company's headquarters. If a state requires something like sexual harassment training, I believe there are 6 states that require employers to train their employees on sexual harassment. If one of your remote employees is working from home in one of those states, performing work in one of those states, you do have to train that one employee on sexual harassment in compliance with the laws of that state where they are living and working from home. Some states require require paid breaks, some don't. If you're remote employees in a state that requires paid breaks, you have to make sure they're taking those breaks. This is hard for a remote employee who may be doing personal activities between meetings, like putting in a load of laundry, but you can't be auto-deducting breaks. This is a bad practice. You need to make a break policy. You can make that employee log off the network for 30 minutes and tell employees if you are in a state with mandatory breaks that they will be disciplined if there is any network activity or emails sent during the break period. Most employees like remote work precisely because it is flexible, but you do not want a non-exempt employee turning around and saying they found it impossible to walk away while they were working remotely and they ate all of their lunches while working and never had a chance to sit down and step away and take a break. FMLA only applies if you have 50 or more employees within 75 miles of the job site. I think that's something that most of us know. Some state family and medical leave laws are going to look at your total headcount nationwide and then apply to the one employee performing work in the state that those laws cover. Got to remember things like required paperwork at the time of hire and time of termination, the frequency of pay, final pay laws, pay stub info, personnel file access laws. Don't forget about any of these for your out-of-state employees. For example, you may need to put things on a pay stub for your one remote employee in a different state that is not on the pay stub for any of your other employees. How you're going to work that out with your payroll company, or whether you're going to end up typing one pay stub out by hand every pay period, that's something you're going to need to work out, but you're going to need to know what needs to be on the pay stub in the state where your employee is performing remote work. Again, this is something that myHRcounsel can help you work out. We practice in all 50 states. We know what you're going to need to comply in the state where your employee is. If you have a remote employee in California, watch out, because the agencies that enforce California's labor laws will show no mercy for even the smallest violation, and they will not hesitate to come after you, even if you have only one employee working remotely in California. I just can't tell you enough how, I mean, in any state, be careful, and this is all going to apply, but I think many employers can take a laid back approach with California and some similar states that are very employee friendly, and end up being very surprised at how serious following those state employment laws actually is. An employee can bring a claim in their work state against you for failing to follow that state's laws. So you, like I said, you can be subject to the remote state's jurisdiction. Unemployment insurance. So you should be paying SUTA taxes to the state in which the employee performs the work. If you have a remote employee, if they work from their home, if their home is in another state, then the state in which you are headquartered, you pay SUTA taxes to the state in which the employee is performing that work. Generally, the employee must apply for benefits in the state which they perform the work. If you have a hybrid employee, and this is, as I said, people moving out to the country, moving out maybe to a different area of the state during the pandemic, if you have a hybrid employee who's working remotely in one state part of the week and comes into the office another part of the week, this is going to be more common if you have an employee who lives in New Jersey or Connecticut and works part-time from home and then comes into the office in New York part of the week, or states where people maybe are working from home in Wisconsin near the border. part of the week and come into the office in Minneapolis or St. Paul for part of the week. States where employees are going to commute across state lines, they may choose where to file, or if your employee went remote halfway through the year and worked remotely in different states, they may have a choice where to file. If they have a choice between states where they are going to file, the DOL has rules to determine which state will pay. This includes where the employee works a majority of the time, where the employer's base of operations is, where the employer receives their direction or their work orders from, where the employee resides, whether states have reciprocal agreements. If the states have reciprocal agreements, the employer can choose the state that covers the employee. But again, be careful, check with counsel. Some states may require you to start paying SUTA tax in that state if an employee works there one day. There are other circumstances to consider there. Some states, it's as few as 10 days. If you've got a remote employee, again, who's doing some traveling, they're working remotely, they say, you know what, I'm gonna go spend 3 weeks with my cousin in a nice vacation destination area of the country, and I'm gonna go work 3 weeks from that state, you may need to pay SUTA tax to that state if they're working there for 3 weeks. These laws are very specific and very complicated, and they are very different from state to state. So you're going to want to have employment law counsel helping you out with this. Tax withholding. So many people moved out of the city, like I said, in the beginning of the pandemic, and you may be more likely to have employees coming in from another state if you're calling employees back to work and having a hybrid arrangement. And again, this is, you may have to now withhold from 2 states. If you have states with reciprocity, that allows employees to only pay income tax to their resident state. One thing that did come up in the pandemic that you may have heard of was New Hampshire versus Massachusetts. Now, in the early months of the pandemic, the Massachusetts Department of Revenue made an emergency regulation that treated non-residents. So this is people who lived in New Hampshire and worked in Massachusetts when they were working on site, people who commuted from New Hampshire. The Massachusetts Department of Revenue said, you know what, during the pandemic, even though you're at home in New Hampshire working from home, we're going to still treat you like you work in Massachusetts, and we're going to tax you in Massachusetts. This was an effort by Massachusetts to keep receiving personal income tax revenues from non-residents during the state of emergency. New Hampshire does not impose personal income tax on its residents. So New Hampshire residents who work in New Hampshire wouldn't pay income tax in any state. But this rule that Massachusetts started would result in these individual residents. Now they're residents of New Hampshire. They're also working in New Hampshire because they're working from home. They shouldn't have to pay any state income tax because they're living and working in New Hampshire. But Massachusetts is saying, hey, you're working for a Massachusetts employer. You got to pay Massachusetts tax. New Hampshire sued Massachusetts to stop taxing its residents. The Supreme Court said, we're not going to touch this. You guys work it out on your own. Massachusetts eventually stopped the rule and allowed taxes to be sourced where the work is actually performed. So that's over. You don't have to worry about that. If you are a New York employer, or a New Jersey or a Connecticut employer, you may know about New York's convenience of the employer rule. If you reside outside of New York, but you work for a New York employer, your wages are New York source income. So if you are living in New Jersey and working from home for a New York employer, even though you are performing the work from New Jersey, that income, those wages are New York source income, unless out of necessity, you are required to perform the work in another state. And New York enforced this even in the early days of the pandemic when out-of-state residents couldn't even legally come into their New York offices. A lot of people who used the pandemic as a reason to leave New York and move to a low-tax state like Florida to work remotely got a bad surprise if they didn't know about this rule. The only way around this is if you can prove that your home office is actually a bona fide location of the employer. And so again, this is New York only and was Massachusetts during the first part of the pandemic. But as I keep saying as a broken record, one more reason to seek counsel. Workers' compensation, you must have workers' compensation where the employee's work is localized. If you're going to have employees working some days in one state and some days in another state, you're going to have to check with counsel and your insurer to figure out where the work is localized. If you have an employee who travels, obviously you do not have to purchase coverage in every state they visit. The issue is what is the threshold. In some states, you can get extraterritorial coverage from your existing insurer if there is a reciprocity agreements between the states. But generally, the laws of the state where the injury occurs are going to govern where the claim is how the claim is handled. Workplace safety, OSHA requires you to use reasonable diligence to identify possible hazards in the remote work environment and provide necessary protection through training, PPE, or other controls to eliminate the hazard. If you require an employee to use a computer, printer, scanner, router, and this could pose a fire hazard if it overloads an electrical circuit, you must make sure your employee knows about electrical safety. The coming and going rule. Normally, a car accident during an employee's commute to and from the office would not be a work comp injury. But when you have a hybrid employee, they now have two job sites. One of the job sites is their home or the remote site they're working from, and one of their job sites is your office. So when they are driving from their home office to your office, they are no longer commuting. They are traveling between two of your locations for work purposes, and that is covered by workers' comp. So if they are in a car accident when traveling between their home office and your office, that is now covered by workers' comp. The personal comfort doctrine. So an injury is compensable if the employee is engaging in activities necessary for their personal comfort or welfare, and it is part of normal working conditions. That means if your employee gets hurt in their home or at another remote site where they're working, going to the bathroom, getting lunch or coffee, going out to have a cigarette, it is a compensable injury. Yes, that means if your employee works from home and they do not salt their sidewalk and they go outside to have a cigarette during work hours and they slip on the ice and break their leg, your insurer may be paying out the claim. You cannot plead ignorance. Your carrier will not deny a claim for an employee who trips over the dog on the way to the printer just because you didn't know the employee had the dog. This is one of the things that is maybe the biggest shock to employers when they start moving to remote or hybrid work. You can protect against claims. The first thing is requiring the employee to identify and commit to a work site. Where are they going to work? Is it going to be at home? Is it going to be at a shared workspace like a WeWork type of setting? Is it going to be at Starbucks? Where are they going to meet with clients? If they need to work with clients, you need to require travel to be approved. You should know where your employee is working physically at all times. Like I mentioned before, identifying things like an overloaded electrical outlet can be discovered with photos or a Zoom tour. You can have your employee bring their laptop all around their workspace with the camera on at the beginning of each week or month just to do a workplace safety checkup on their work area. OSHA does not require you to ensure that their home is safe, but that their workspace is safe. If their workspace is in the basement and the basement stairs are falling apart, you are going to want to step in there and intervene. Most compensable injuries with remote workers are going to be the cumulative injuries, the carpal tunnel, the tendonitis, the back pain, from people working in poor ergonomic settings. So sitting in bed with a laptop, having a desktop on a kitchen table with their wrists and hands turned upward. There are people you can hire to go out to remote employees' homes. If this is going to be a permanent switch for your workforce, it can be a good investment. You can have employees take pictures, again, of their workspace and make corrections or suggest proper furniture or equipment for ergonomic, the best ergonomic performance. You can require specific furniture or equipment in order to work from home so that the employee has proper ergonomics. In some states, though, if you require it, you also have to pay for it. So you can tell employees, you know what, you need to have this thing under your laptop to raise it up so that your wrists are at the right height. But in some states, if you require that, you're going to have to pay for it. You need to train employees on how to avoid common hazards in the home, how to avoid cumulative injuries, slip and falls, and instruct your remote employees to report all injuries as soon as practical and train them on the reporting procedure just as you would in the office. Information and data security, you need to set up for your employees what are the minimum requirements, secure private network, VPN, no using the public Wi-Fi at Starbucks, saving material to a shared drive rather than to the desktop or a flash drive, not using your personal email for work, following security procedures for teleconferencing. Employees need to either use an employer-provided computer or a personal computer that is accessible solely to them, not the family PC, or do you want an employer-provided laptop and prohibits, all personal use to protect against dangerous web traffic? Do you want minimum requirements for antivirus software, training on malware, ransomware, phishing attacks? These have exploded since employees have been moving remotely and email communication has increased. Will employees need to take files off-site in a medical setting? Is HIPAA going to apply? How do you make people accountable for who has what? Can they bring a client file if they're working at Starbucks? These are all things that you need to get ahead of. Rules for protection of equipment, you can have them sign up on policies, you can discipline or terminate them for failure to follow, you can prohibit leaving the laptop or a company cell phone in a parked car. If the employee does it and the laptop gets stolen, unfortunately, you cannot payroll deduct to get the value back in some states, but you can immediately terminate them if they do this. Some states you can recover the value. In some states, you can get them to sign something agreeing to payroll deduction if the laptop or the cell phone gets stolen because they left it in the car. Again, states vary. This is why you need counsel in all 50 states. Prohibit sharing the network password with family members, no letting children play with the company printer. If you terminate a remote employee, always send a prepaid shipping container with their final wages to return all employer files and equipment. They are not going to come in your office to drop it off. Make it as easy to return as you possibly can if you want your stuff back. You cannot hold their final paycheck until they return equipment. In some states, you can, like I said, you can deduct the value of equipment that they still have in some states, but you cannot hold the final paycheck. You do have to give them that final paycheck. Even if you can deduct somewhat, you usually cannot deduct you can't take the entire paycheck. In some states, you can deduct some amount, but you cannot hold the final paycheck. If they never return it, you can take them to small claims court, decide whether that's going to be worth your work hours and money to do that. Consider having employees sign a restrictive covenant if you are going to let confidential information leave the work site. If they're going to be able to have access to that at home, counsel, we can help you draft a restrictive covenant with an Ask HR subscription. This may be the best way to protect confidential information now that you're not going to be able to control it in your physical location. Expense reimbursement, this is not required under the Fair Labor Standards Act. This is not federal law to reimburse employees for expenses. This comes to as a surprise to some clients when they think they have to pay employees for mileage, and they do not have to in their state. However, 16 states do have a statute requiring some type of reimbursement for business expenses. It's all dependent on state law. Again, like I'm saying with every slide, you need counsel in all 50 states to let you know what's happening in the state where your employee's working. Again, it is the state where the employee is performing work, not necessarily the state where you're headquartered. Your home office may be in a state that does not have a law requiring reimbursement of business expenses, but if your employee is physically performing work in California or Illinois or Washington, D.C., you're going to have to reimburse all of that employee's necessary business expenses, everything that is needed to perform their job. If you have system requirements that your employee's personal computer doesn't meet, you can set parameters. You can say, we will pay to upgrade your system, or we will give you an allowance that will permit you to purchase one of these 5 laptops that meet your requirement. Then that becomes the necessary expense. The necessary expense is to purchase one of these 5 laptops that we have identified. If you just say your personal computer doesn't meet our system requirements, you need to go get a computer, and they come back with a top of the line, state of the art, all the bells and whistles computer, you are going to have to reimburse them for what they purchased, because you did not draw the line and you did not say what was necessary. All you said was a computer is necessary, and at that point you're going to have a big reimbursement bill on your hands. So set parameters when you are telling employees what is necessary or what is required. Again, requiring ergonomic furniture and equipment. It can be smart. It can avoid a work comp claim. If you are going to have to pay for it in your state, it may serve you well to source it and order it yourself rather than telling your employee you have to have this type of chair. If you don't require any specific office furniture, you don't have to pay for a Herman Miller chair just because an employee who works from home orders one. If they already have a chair at home that they can sit on, this is not a necessary or required expense. This is another reason to do those photos or Zoom tours to see what kind of setup your employees have and what might be a necessary expense and what might just be angling for an upgrade. In some states, you still have to reimburse internet or cell phones if you require them to have an internet or cell phone for work, even though everybody has internet or a cell phone anyways, regardless of whether they work for you or not. Depending on state law, if employees have the choice to come into the office and you make everything available that they need on site, and they say, nope, you know what, I'm going to set up shop at home, you may not need to reimburse anything. You've made it all available at the work site. And in that case, remote work is a choice. And it's not a necessary expense. This is why you need the policy and the agreement before you start remote or hybrid work, or you need to get in front of it now if you've already started. You need to define exactly what the required or necessary equipment is, how they're going to get it, whether you need to make arrangements to provide everybody with the equipment that you price and source, or whether you're going to get stuck processing out of control expense requests because you didn't plan ahead. And I know we're almost out of time here. I'm just going to go 1 minute over talking about dependent care. Generally, remote work is not a substitute for having adequate elder care or child care. It may be offered as an accommodation to retain employees who find themselves without elder care or child care due to a situation like the pandemic. Decide in advance how you are going to handle this before the situation arises. Does your company have workers remotely working already? Do you have a remote work policy? You do not have to accommodate someone with childcare or elder care needs like you need to accommodate someone with a disability under the ADA. It is not required by law. You need to think about, do you need the employee to respond with a certain time frame? Does the employee need to have regularly scheduled video calls? Are there job duties or requirements that are incongruent with the unpredictable nature of dependent care? Or is the employee just given a set amount of work that they can complete at their own pace throughout the day? These are things that you're going to want to think about when you're deciding whether or not you're going to take a hard line against having dependent care or not when the employee is working remotely. If you are not going to take a hard line and you're not going to say that other arrangements for dependent care absolutely must be made for remote work to be allowed, set performance goals. Again, make it clear how you're going to determine whether dependent care responsibilities are interfering with work performance. Have the discussion, set out the standards and the metrics before this arrangement starts. Do not discriminate. Do not deny remote work arrangements to someone who has a child or an aging parent because you are worried that the employee might allow them to be at home while working remotely, or if there is an illness or closure, or because you suspect that someone with a child or aging parent is more likely to abuse the system. Do not say we don't allow people with kids to work remotely. Do not speculate that this is illegal. Set the rules. If an employee breaks them, revoke the remote work arrangement. Do not allow or deny remote work employees with dependent care needs based on your opinion of their particular dependent. Do not say employee X can keep her kids at home because they are well behaved, but employee Y must work from the office because her kids are annoying. Set a policy. And base allowing or revoking remote work on the quality or quantity of work performed. So that is all I have. I'm sorry I kept you a little bit over this afternoon. Again, so many policies and templates that we have that we can help you with that are part of an Ask HR subscription. If you have Ask HR Lite and you are looking to upgrade, you can check out our packages at myHRcounsel.com. If you have Ask HR and you're looking to get a policy, our telecommuting and remote work agreement to sign with your employees, definitely open a ticket. That's something we can provide for you. Any of our clients open a ticket with any questions, state-specific questions that you might have with regard to remote work. If you're not a client or if you have questions about upgrading or any of our packages, again, myHRcounsel.com, or you can shoot us an email at info@myHRcounsel.com. Again, if you are a client and you have questions about how to use the Ask an Attorney portal, info@myHRcounsel.com would be a place to send a message for that. So many ways to get in touch with us, so many things we have to offer to make telecommuting, hybrid and remote work work for your company. So thank you for attending.
Thank you, Britt, and thank you to everyone for attending today. We will be sending that follow-up email that we mentioned earlier. It's going to have the recording, it's going to have our slide deck, and then also the HRCI credit for attendees. And then, as Britt mentioned, if you want to subscribe to our services or upgrade your service level, just go to myHRcounsel.com and /packages, and there's a list of our services available. And then if you would like a demo of our services, we'd be happy to do that for you as well. Once again, thank you so much for attending, and we hope that you have a great rest of the day, and join us for our webinar again next month.